Introduction of Egyptian Tales translated from the Papyri. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Timothy Ferguson. Egyptian Tales translated from the Papyri, First Series, by Sir W. M. Flinders Petrie. Introduction. It is strange that while literature occupies so much attention as at present, and while fiction is the largest division of our bookwork, the oldest literature and fiction of the world should yet have remained unpresented to English readers. The tales of ancient Egypt have appeared collectively only in French in the charming volume of Maspero's Contes Populaires, while some have been translated into English at scattered times in volumes of the Records of the Past. But research moves forward, and translations that were excellent 20 years ago may now be largely improved as we attain more insight into the language. For another reason also there is a wide ground for the present volume. In no case have any illustrations been attempted to give the basis for imagination, which is all the more needed when reading of an age and a land unfamiliar to our ideas. When following a narrative, whether of real events or of fiction, many persons, perhaps most, find themselves unconsciously framing in their minds the scenery and the beings of which they are reading. To give a correct picture of the character of each of the various ages to which these tales belong has been the aim of the present illustrations. A definite period has been assigned to each tale, in accordance with the indications or the history involved in it, and, so far as our present knowledge goes, all the details of life in the scenes here illustrated are rendered in accord with the period of the story. To some purely scholastic minds it may seem presumptuous to intermingle translations of notable documents with fanciful illustrations, but, considering the greater precision with which in recent years we have been able to learn the changes and the fashions of ancient life in Egypt, and the essentially unhistorical nature of most of these tales, there seems ample reason to provide such material for the reader's imagination in following the stories. It may give them more life and reality, and may emphasize the differences which existed between the different periods to which these tales refer. It will be noticed how the growth of the novel is shadowed out in the varied grounds and treatment of the tales. The earliest is purely a collection of marvels or fabulous incidents of the simplest kind. Then we advance to contrasts between town and country, between Egypt and foreign lands. Then personal adventure and the interest in schemes and successes becomes the staple material, while only in the later periods does character come in as the groundwork. The same may be seen in English literature, first the tales of wonders and strange lands, then the novel of adventure, and lastly the novel of character. In translating these documents into English, I have freely used the various translations already published in other languages, but in all cases more or less revision and retranslation from the original has been made. In this matter I am indebted to Mr. F. L. Griffith, who has, in some cases, as in Anpu and Bata, almost entirely retranslated the original papyrus. The material followed in each instance will be found stated in the notes accompanying the tales. As to the actual phraseology, I am alone responsible for that. How far original idiom should be retained in any translation is always a debated question, and must entirely depend on the object in view. Here, the purpose of rendering the work intelligible to ordinary readers required the modifying of some idioms and the paraphrasing of others, but so far as is possible the style and tone of the original has been preserved, and whatever could be easily followed has been left to speak for itself. In many plainnesses of speech the old Egyptian resembled the modern Oriental or our own forefathers, more than ourselves in this age of squeamishness as yet unparalleled in the world. To avoid offence, a few little modifications of words have been made, but rather than give a false impression by tampering with any of the narrative, I have omitted the sequel of the last tale, and given only an outline of it. The diction adopted has been the oldest that could be used without affectation when dealing with the early times. It has been purposely modified in the later tales, and in the last, which is of Ptolemaic authorship, a modern style has been followed, as more compatible with the later tone of the narrative. For the illustrations, Mr. Tristram Ellis's familiarity with Egypt has been of good account in his lifelike scenes here used. For each drawing I have searched for the material among the monuments and remains of the age. The details of the dresses, the architecture, and the utensils are all in accord with the period of each tale. In the tale of Setnau, two different styles are introduced. Ahura is probably of the time of Amenhotep III, whereas Setnau is a son of Ramisu II, and the change of fashion between the two different dynasties has been followed as a distinctive of the two persons, one a Ka, or double of the deceased, the other a living man. To the reader who starts with the current idea that all Egyptians were alike, this continual change from one period to another may seem almost fanciful, but it rests on such certain authority that we may hope that this little volume may have its use as an object lesson in practical archaeology. The use and abuse of notes is a matter of dispute, to be constantly interrupted in reading by some needless and elementary explanation is an impertinence both to the author and the reader. The one cannot resent it, the other therefore resents it for both. But what is to be deemed needless entirely depends on the reader. I have been asked in what country Pompeii is, as it is not in the English Gazetteer. Rather than intrude, then, on the reader when he is in high discourse with the ancients, I humbly set up my interpreter's booth next door, and if he cares to call in and ask about any difficulties, I shall be glad to help him if I can. Not even numbers are intruded to refer to notes, for how often an eager reader has been led off his trail and turned blithely to refer to 37 or 186, only to find CJZ 38 377, at which he gnashed his teeth and cursed such interruptions. So those to whom the original tales are obscure are humbly requested to try for some profit from the remarks after them, that have been gleaned by the translator. Much might be said by a folklorist, in proportion to his ardour, but as there are folklorists, and the schools of Rabbi Andrew and Rabbi Joseph write different targums, I have left each to make his own commentary, without prejudice. End of introduction. Recording by Timothy Ferguson, Gold Coast, Australia. Chapter 1 of Egyptian Papyri, First Series. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Timothy Ferguson. Egyptian Tales, First Series, by Sir W. M. Flinders Petrie. Chapter 1. Tales of the Magicians. One day, when King Khufu reigned over all the land, he said to his chancellor who stood before him, "Go call me my sons and my counsellors, that I may ask them of a thing." And his sons and his counsellors came, and stood before him, and he said to them, "Know ye a man who can tell me tales of the deeds of the magicians?" Then the royal son Khafra stood forth, and said, "I will tell thy majesty a tale of the days of thy forefather Nebka, the blessed, of what came to pass when he went into the temple of Ptah of Ankhtaui." Khafra's tale. His majesty was walking unto the temple of Ptah, and went unto the house of the chief reciter, Uba-Anna, with his train. Now, when the wife of Uba-Anna saw a page among those who stood behind the king, her heart longed after him, and she sent her servant unto him, with a present of a box full of garments. And he came then with the servant. Now there was a lodge in the garden of Uba-Anna, and one day the page said to the wife of Uba-Anna, "In the garden of Uba-Anna there is now a lodge. Behold, let us therein take our pleasure." So the wife of Uba-Anna sent to the steward who had charge over the garden, saying, "Let the lodge which is in the garden be made ready." And she remained there, and rested and drank with the page until the sun went down. And when the even was now come, the page went forth to bathe, and the steward said, "I must go and tell Uba-Anna of this matter." Now when this day was past, and another day came, then went the steward to Uba-Anna, and told him of all these things. Then said Uba-Anna, "Bring me my casket of ebony and electrum." And they brought it. And he fashioned a crocodile out of wax, 7 fingers long, and he enchanted it, and said, "When the page comes and bathes in my lake, "Seize on him." And he gave it to the steward, and said to him, "When the page shall go down into the lake to bathe, as he is daily wont to do, then throw in this crocodile behind him." And the steward went forth, bearing the crocodile. And the wife of Uba-Anna sent to the steward who had charge over the garden, saying, "Let the lodge which is in the garden be made ready, for I come to tarry there." And the lodge was prepared with all good things, and she came and made merry therein with the page. And when the even was now come, the page went forth to bathe, as he was wont to do. And the steward cast in the wax crocodile after him into the water. And behold, it became a great crocodile, 7 cubits in length, and it seized on the page. And Uba-Anna abode yet 7 days with the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nebka the blessed, while the page was stifled in the crocodile. And after the 7 days were past, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nebka the blessed, went forth, and Uba-Anna went before him. And Uba-Anna said unto his majesty, "Will your majesty come and see this wonder that has come to pass in your days unto a page?" And the king went with Uba-Anna. And Uba-Anna called unto the crocodile, and said, "Bring forth the page." And the crocodile came forth from the lake with the page. Uba-Anna said unto the king, "Behold, whatever I command this crocodile, he will do it." And his majesty said, "I pray you send back this crocodile." And Uba-Anna stooped, and took up the crocodile, and it became in his hand a crocodile of wax. And then Uba-Anna told the king that which had passed in his house, with the page and his wife. And his majesty said unto the crocodile, "Take to thee thy prey." And the crocodile plunged into the lake with his prey, and no man knew whither he went. And his majesty the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nebka the blessed, commanded. And they brought forth the wife of Uba-Anna to the north side of the harem, and burnt her with fire, and cast her ashes in the river. This is a wonder that came to pass in the days of thy forefather, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nebka, of the acts of the chief reciter, Uba-Anna. His majesty the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Khufu, said, "Let there be presented to the king Nebka the blessed 1,000 loaves, 100 draughts of beer, an ox, 2 jars of incense, and let there be presented a loaf, a jar of beer, a jar of incense, and a piece of meat, to the chief reciter Uba-Anna, for I have seen the token of his learning." And they did all things as his majesty commanded. Balfra's Tale. The royal son Balfra then stood forth and spake. He said, "I will tell thy majesty of a wonder which came to pass in the days of thy father Seneferu the blessed, of the deeds of the chief reciter Zazamank. One day King Seneferu, being weary, went through his palace, seeking for a pleasure to lighten his heart, but he found none. And he said, "Haste, and bring before me the chief reciter and scribe of the roll, Zazamank." And they straightway brought him. And the king said, "I have sought in my palace for some delight, but I have found none." Then said Zazamank to him, "Let thy majesty go upon the lake of the palace, and let there be made ready a boat, with all the fair maidens of the harem of thy palace, and the heart of thy majesty shall be refreshed with the sight, in seeing their rowing up and down the water, and seeing the goodly pools of the birds upon the lake, and beholding its sweet fields and grassy shores. Thus will thy heart be lightened, and I also will go with thee. Bring me 20 oars of ebony inlaid with gold, with blades of light wood inlaid with electrum, and bring me 20 maidens fair in their limbs, their bosoms, and their hair, all virgins, and bring me 20 nets, and give these nets unto the maidens for their garments." And they did according to all the commands of his majesty. And they rowed down the stream and up the stream, and the heart of his majesty was glad with the sight of their rowing. But one of them, at the steering, struck her hair, and her jewel of new malachite fell into the water, and she ceased her song, and rowed not, and her companions ceased, and rowed not, And his majesty said, Row you not further? And they replied, Our little steerer here stays, and rows not. His majesty then said to her, Wherefore rowest thou not? She replied, It is for my jewel of new malachite, which is fallen in the water. And he said to her, Row on, for, behold, I will replace it. And she answered, But I want my own piece back in its setting. And his majesty said, Haste, bring me the chief reciter Zazamankh. And they brought him. And his majesty said, Zazamankh, my brother, I have done as thou sayest, and the heart of his majesty is refreshed with the sight of their rowing. But now a jewel of new malachite of one of the little ones is fallen in the water, and she ceases and rows not, and she has spoilt the rowing of her side. And I said to her, Wherefore rowest thou not? And she answered me, It is for my jewel of new malachite, which is fallen in the water. I replied to her, Row on, for, behold, I will replace it. And she answered to me, But I want my own piece back again in its setting. Then the chief reciter Zazamankh spake his magic speech, and he placed one part of the waters of the lake upon the other, and discovered the jewel lying upon a shard, and he took it up, and gave it unto its mistress. And the water, which was 12 cubits deep in the middle, reached now to 24 cubits after he turned it. And he spake, and used his magic speech, and he brought again the water of the lake to its place. And his majesty spent a joyful day with the whole of the royal house. Then rewarded he the chief reciter Zazamankh with all good things. Behold, this is a wonder that came to pass in the days of thy father, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Seneferu, of the deeds of the chief reciter, the scribe of the rolls, Zazamankh. Then said the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Khufu the blessed, Let there be presented an offering of 1,000 cakes, 100 draughts of beer, an ox, and 2 jars of incense, to the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Seneferu the blessed. And let there be given a loaf, a jar of beer, and a jar of incense to the chief reciter, the scribe of the rolls, Zazamankh, for I have seen the token of his learning. And they did all things as his majesty commanded. Hordedef's tale. The royal son Hordedef then stood forth and spake. He said, Hitherto hast thou only heard tokens of those who have gone before, and of which no man knoweth their truth. But I will show thy majesty a man of thine own days. And his majesty said, Who is he, Hordedef? And the royal son Hordedef answered, It is a certain man named Dedi, who dwells at Dednesferu. He is a man of 110 years old, and he eats 500 loaves of bread, and a side of beef, and drinks 100 draughts of beer unto this day. He knows how to restore the head that is smitten off. He knows how to cause the lion to follow him, trailing his halter on the ground. He knows the designs of the dwelling of Tahuti. The majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Khufu the blessed, has long sought for the designs of the dwelling of Tahuti, that he may make the like of them in his pyramid. And his majesty said, Thou thyself, Hordedef, my son, bring him to me. Then were the ships made ready for the king's son Hordedef, and he went up the stream to Dednesferu. And when the ships had moored at the haven, he landed, and sat him in a litter of ebony, the poles of which were of cedar wood overlaid with gold. Now when he drew near to Dedi, they set down the litter, and he arose to greet Dedi, and found him lying on a palm stick couch at the door of his house. One servant held his head and rubbed him, and another rubbed his feet. And the king's son Hordedef said, Thy state is that of one who lives to good old age. For old age is the end of our voyage, the time of embalming, the time of burial. Lie then in the sun, free of infirmities, without the babble of dotage. This is the salutation to worthy age. I come from far to call thee, with a message from my father, Khufu the blessed. For thou shalt eat of the best which the king gives, and of the food which those have who follow after him. that he may bring thee in good estate to thy fathers, who are in the tomb. And Dedi replied to him, Peace to thee, Hordedef, son of the king, beloved of his father. May thy father Khufu the blessed praise thee. May he advance thee amongst the elders. May thy car prevail against the enemy. May thy soul know the right road to the gate of him who clothes the afflicted. This is the salutation to the king's son. Then the king's son Hordedef stretched forth his hands to him, and raised him up, and went with him to the haven, giving unto him his arm. Then said Dedi, Let there be given me a boat, to bring me my youths and my books. And they made ready for him 2 boats with their rowers, and Dedi went down the river in the barge, in which was the king's son Hordedef. And when he had reached the palace, the king's son Hordedef entered in to give account unto his majesty the king of Upper and Lower Egypt. Then said the king's son Hordedef, O king, life, wealth, and health, my lord, I have brought Dedi. His majesty replied, Bring him to me speedily. And his majesty went into the hall of columns of Pharaoh, life, wealth, and health. And Dedi was led before him, and his majesty said, Wherefore is it, Dedi, that I have not yet seen thee? And Dedi answered, He who is called it is that comes. The king, life, wealth, and health, calls me, and behold, I come. And his majesty said, Is it true that which men say, that thou canst restore the head which is smitten off? And Dedi replied, Truly I know that, O king, life, wealth, and health, my lord. And his majesty said, Let one bring me a prisoner who is in prison, that his punishment may be fulfilled. And Dedi said, Let it not be a man, O king, my lord. Behold, we do not even thus to our cattle. And a duck was brought unto him, and its head was cut off. And the duck was laid on the west side of the hall, and its head on the east side of the hall. And Dedi spake his magic speech, and the duck fluttered along the ground, and its head came likewise. And when it had come part to part, the duck stood, and quacked. And they brought likewise a goose before him, and he did even so unto it. His majesty caused an ox to be brought, and its head cast on the ground. And Dedi spake his magic speech, and the ox stood upright behind him, and followed him with his halter trailing on the ground. And King Khufu said, And is it true what is said, that thou knowest the number of the designs of the dwelling of Tahuti? And Dedi replied, Pardon me, I know not their number, O king, life, wealth, and health, but I know where they are. And his majesty said, Where is that? And Dedi replied, There is a chest of whetstone in a chamber named the Plan Room in Heliopolis. They are in this chest. And Dedi said further unto him, O king, life, wealth, and health, my lord, it is not I that is to bring them to thee. And his majesty said, Who then is it that shall bring them to me? And Dedi answered to him, It is the eldest of the 3 children who are in the body of Rud-didet, who shall bring them to thee. And his majesty said, Would that it may be as thou sayest. And who is this Rud-didet? And Dedi replied, She is the wife of a priest of Ra, lord of Sakhebu. And she has conceived these 3 sons of Ra, lord of Sakhebu, and the god has promised her that they shall fulfill this noble office of reigning over all this land, and that the eldest of them shall be high priest in Heliopolis. And his majesty's heart became troubled for this. But Dedi spake unto him, What is this that thou thinkest, O king, life, wealth, and health, my lord? Is it because of these 3 children? I tell thee thy son shall reign, and thy son's son, and then one of them. His majesty said, And when shall Rud-didet bear these? And he replied, She shall bear them on the 26th of the month Tybi. And his majesty said, When the banks of the canal of Letopolis are cut, I will walk there, that I may see the temple of Ra, lord of Sakhebu. And Dedi replied, Then I will cause that there be 4 cubits of water by the banks of the canal of Letopolis. When his majesty returned to his palace, his majesty said, "Let them place Dedi in the house of the royal son Hordedef, that he may dwell with them. And let them give him a daily portion of 1,000 loaves, 100 draughts of beer, an ox, and 100 bunches of onions." And they did everything as his majesty commanded. And one day it came to pass that Rud-didet felt the pains of birth, and the majesty of Ra, lord of Sekhebu, said unto Isis, to Nebhat, to Meskent, to Hact, and to Khnumu, "Go ye, and deliver Rud-didet of these 3 children that she shall bear, who are to fulfil this noble office over all this land, that they may build up your temples, furnish your altars with offerings, supply your tables of libation, and increase your endowments." Then went these deities. Their fashion they made as that of dancing girls, and Khnumu was with them as a porter. They drew near unto the house of Ra-Usa, and found him standing with his girdle fallen. And they played before him with their instruments of music. But he said unto them, "My ladies, behold, there is a woman who feels the pains of birth." They said to him, "Let us see her, for we know how to help her." And he replied, "Come then." And they entered in straightway to Rud-didet, and they closed the door on her and on themselves. Then Isis stood before her, and Nebhat stood behind her, and Hact helped her. And Isis said, "O child, by thy name of Usaref, do not do violence." And the child came upon her hands as a child of a cubit. Its bones were strong, the beauty of its limbs was like gold, and its hair was like true lapis lazuli. They washed him and prepared him, and placed him on a carpet on the brickwork. Then Meskent approached him and said, "This is a king who shall reign over all the land." And Khnumu gave him strength to his limbs. Then Isis stood before her, and Nebhat stood behind her, and Hact helped her. And Isis said, "O child, by thy name of Sa-Ra, stay not in her." Then the child came upon her hands, a child of a cubit. Its bones were strong, the beauty of its limbs was like gold, and its hair was like true lapis lazuli. They washed him and prepared him, and laid him on a carpet on the brickwork. Then Meskent approached him and said, "This is a king who shall reign over all the land." And Khnumu gave strength to his limbs. Then Isis stood before her, and Nebhat stood behind her, and Hact helped her. And Isis said, "O child, by thy name of Kaku, remain not in darkness in her." And the child came upon her hands, a child of a cubit, and its bones were strong, the beauty of its limbs was like gold, and its hair was like true lapis lazuli. And Meskent approached him, and said, "This is a king who shall reign over all the land." And Khnumu gave strength to his limbs, and they washed him and prepared him, and laid him on a carpet on the brickwork. And the deities went out, having delivered Rud-didet of the 3 children. And they said, "Rejoice, O Ra-Usa, for, behold, 3 children are born unto thee." And he said unto them, "My ladies, and what shall I give unto ye? Behold, give this bushel of barley here unto your porter, that ye may take it as your reward to the brewhouse." And Khnumu loaded himself with the bushel of barley, and they went away toward the place from which they came. And Isis spake unto these goddesses, and said, "Wherefore have we come without doing a marvel for these children, that we may tell it to their father who has sent us?" Then made they the divine diadems of the king, life, wealth, and health, and laid them in the bushel of barley. And they caused the clouds to come with wind and rain, and they turned back again unto the house. And they said, "Let us put this barley in a closed chamber sealed up, until we return northward dancing." And they placed the barley in a closed chamber. And Rud-didet purified herself with purification of 14 days. And she said to her handmaid, "Is the house made ready?" And she replied, "All things are made ready, but the brewing barley is not yet brought." And Rud-didet said, "Wherefore is the brewing barley not yet brought?" And the servant said, "It would all of it long since be ready, if the barley had not been given to the dancing girls, and lay in the chamber under their seal." Rud-didet said, "Go down and bring of it, and Ra-Usa will give them in its stead when he shall come." And the handmaid went. and opened the chamber, and she heard talking and singing, music and dancing, quavering, and all things which are performed for a king in his chamber. And she returned, and told to Rud didet all that she had heard. And she went through the chamber, but she found not the place where the sound was. And she laid her temple to the sack, and found that the sounds were in it. She placed it in a chest, and put that in another locker, and tied it fast with leather, and laid it in the storeroom where the things were, and sealed it. And Ra-usa came from the field, and Rud didet repeated unto him these things. And his heart was glad above all things. And they sat down and made a joyful day. And after these days it came to pass that Rud didet was wroth with her servant, and beat her with stripes. And the servant said unto those that were in the house, Shall it be done thus to me? She has borne 3 kings, and I will go and tell this to his majesty King Khufu the Blessed. And she went, and found the eldest brother of her mother, who was binding his flax on the floor. And he said to her, Whither goest thou, my little maid? And she told him of all these things. And her brother said to her, Wherefore comest thou thus to me? Shall I agree to treachery? And he took a bunch of flax to her, and laid on her a violent blow. And the servant went to fetch a handful of water, and a crocodile carried her away. Her uncle went therefore to tell of this to Rud didet. And he found Rud didet sitting, her head on her knees, and her heart beyond measure sad. And he said to her, My lady, why makest thou thy heart thus? And she answered, It is because of this little wretch that was in the house. Behold, she went out, saying, I will go and tell it. And he bowed his head unto the ground, and said, My lady, she came and told me of these things, and made her complaint unto me. And I laid on her a violent blow, and she went forth to draw water, and a crocodile carried her away. The rest of the tale is lost. Remarks. The tales of the magicians are preserved only in a single copy, and of that the beginning of the story is entirely lost. The papyrus was bought from Egypt by an English traveller, and was purchased by the Berlin Museum from the property of Lepsius, who had received it from the owner, Mr. Westcar. Hence it is known as the Westcar Papyrus. It was written probably in the 12th dynasty, but doubtless embodied tales which had been floating for generations before about the names of the early kings. It shows us probably the kind of material that existed for the great recension of the pre-monumental history made in the time of Seti I. Those ages of the first 3 dynasties were as long before that recension as we are after it, and this must always be remembered in considering the authority of the Egyptian records. This papyrus has been more thoroughly studied than most, perhaps more than any other. Ehrman has devoted 2 volumes to it, publishing the whole in photographic facsimile, transcribed into hieroglyphs, transcribed into the modern alphabet, translated literally, translated freely, commented on and discussed word by word, with a complete glossary of all the words used in it. This exhaustive publication is named De Machen des Papyrus Westcar. Moreover, Maspero has given it a current translation in the Quantes Populares, 2nd edition, pages 53 to 86. The scheme of these tales is that they are all told to King Khufu by his sons, and as the beginning is lost, 8 lines are here added to explain this and introduce the subject. The actual papyrus begins with the last few words of a previous tale concerning some other magician under an earlier king. Then comes the tale of Khafra, next that of Balfra, and finally that of Hordedef. It need hardly be said that these tales are quite fictitious. The king and his successor Khafra are real, but the other sons cannot be identified, and the confusion of supposing 3 kings of the 5th dynasty to be triplets born early in the 4th dynasty shows what very vague ideas of their own histories the Egyptians had when these tales were formed. This does not prevent our seeing that they embodied some very important traditions, and gives us an unequalled picture of the early civilization. In the earliest tale of the 3, there seems at first sight merely a sketch of faithlessness and revenge, but there is probably much more in it. To read it aright, we must bear in mind the position of woman in ancient Egypt. If in later ages Islam has gone to the extreme of man determining his own divorce at a word, in earlier times almost the opposite system prevailed. All property belonged to the woman. All that a man could earn or inherit was made over to his wife, and families always reckoned back further on the mother's side than the father's. As the changes in historical times have been in the direction of men's rights, it is very unlikely that this system of female predominance was invented or introduced, but rather that it descends from primitive times. In this tale we see, then, at the beginning of our knowledge of the country, the clashing of two different social systems. The reciter is strong for men's rights. He brings destruction on the wife, and never even gives her name, but always merely calls her the wife of Uba Anna. But behind all this, there is probably the remains of a very different system. The servant employed by the mistress seems to see nothing outrageous in her proceedings. Even the steward, who is on the master's side, waits a day or two before reporting matters. When we remember the supremacy in property and descent which women held in Egypt, and then read this tale, it seems that it belongs to the close of a social system like that of the Nairs, in which the lady makes her selection, with variations from time to time. The incident of sending a present of clothing is curiously like the tale about a certain English envoy whose proprieties were sadly ruffled in the Nair country when a lady sent him a grand shawl with an intimation of her choice. The priestesses of Ammon retained to the last this privilege of choice, as being under divine and not human protection, but it seems to have become unseemly in late times. The hinging of this tale, and of those that follow it, upon the use of magic shows how thoroughly the belief in magic powers was ingrained in the Egyptians. Now such a belief implies the presence of magicians, and shows how familiar must have been the claim to such powers, and the practising of tricks of witchcraft, so prevalent in Africa in modern times. The efficacy of a model, such as this crocodile of wax, is an idea continually met with in Egypt. The system of tomb furniture and decoration, of Ka statues, of Ushabtis, or figures to work for the deceased, and the models placed in foundation deposits, all show how a model was supposed to have the efficacy of an actual reality. Even in the latest tale of all, written in Ptolemaic times, Set now makes a model of a boat and men to be sunk in the river to work for him. The reconversion of the crocodile to wax, on being taken up by the magician, reminds us of the serpent becoming a rod again when taken up by Aaron. The punishment of burning alive is very rarely, if ever, mentioned in Egyptian history, though it occurs in modern Egyptian tales, and it looks as if it were brought in here rather as a dire horror for the climax than as a probable incident. The place of the penalty, in front of the harem, or the private portion of the palace, was evidently for the intimidation of other ladies. At the close of each tale, King Khufu, to whom it is told, orders funerary offerings by the usual formula to be presented in honour of the king under whom the wonders took place. On the tablets of the tombs in the early times there is usually recorded the offering, or rather the pious desire that there should be offered, thousands of loaves, of oxen, of gazelles, of cranes and such, for a deceased person. Such expression cost no more by the thousand than by the dozen, so thousands came to be the usual expression in all ordaining of offerings. We are so accustomed to think of tedium as something modern, that it seems strange to find, in the oldest tales in the world, how the first king of whom we know anything was bored by his pleasures. A reward for discovering a new pleasure is the very basis of the tale of Sneferu, and the wise man's remedy of a day in the country is still the best resource, though all that we know as human history has tried its own experiments and enjoyments since then. The flavour of the ballet thrown in, by the introduction of the damsels of the household clad in fishing nets, is not yet obsolete in modern amusements, and even in this century Muhammad Ali had resource to the same way of killing time, as he was rowed about by his harem, but on an artificial lake. The use of two large oars for steering explains the detail of the story. The oars were one on each side of the stern, and were each managed by a steerer. From the tale we see the steerer led the song of the rowers, and if the leader ceased, all that side of the boat ceased also. The position of the lost jewel upon the hair shows that it was a fillet set with inlaying, like that seen on early figures, such as Nefert at Medum, who wears a fillet of rosettes to retain the hair, and the position of the steering oar attached to the post, with the handle rising high in the air, explains how it could strike the fillet and displace the jewel. The last tale is really double, a tale within a tale. It begins with the wonders done by Dedi, and then goes on with the history of the children about whom he prophesied to Khufu. The village of Dedi was probably near Medum. As in the temple of Snefru at Medum, an offering was found, presented by a worshipper to the gods of dead Snefru, hence the background which is here given for the scene of Hordedef leading old Dedi. The translation of the designs of the dwelling of Tahuti is not certain, but the passage seems to refer to some architectural plan that was desired for the pyramid. The story of Rud Didit is remarkable historically. She is said to be the wife of the priest of Ra. Her children are the sons of Ra, and they are the first three kings of the 5th dynasty, and supplanted the line of Khufu. This points to the 5th dynasty having been a priestly usurpation, and so on looking at its history we see two confirmations of this. The title Son of Ra is so common in most ages in Egypt that it is taken for granted, and is applied in lists to any second cartouche. But it is not found until well into the 5th dynasty. The earlier kings were not descendants of Ra, and it is only on arriving at this dynasty, which claimed descent from Ra through the wife of the priest of Ra, that we find the claim of each king to be a son of Ra. Another confirmation of this priestly descent is the abundance of priesthoods established for the kings of the 5th dynasty, a care which agrees with their having a priestly origin. While in the tale it is particularly said that they would build up the temples, furnish the altars with offerings, supply the tables with libations, and increase the religious endowments. The names of the three children are a play upon the names of the first three kings of the 5th dynasty. Usakaf is made into Usaref, Sahura is written Sarah, and Kaka is Kaku, thus making allusions to their births. The comparison of the hair to the true lapis lazuli seems very strange, but there is often a confusion between black and blue, and Azrak means either dark blue or green, or black in present Arabic. Lapis lazuli is brought into the name of the queen of Ramisu VI, who was called Golden Lazuli, Nub Kesdeb, recalling the comparison here of personal beauty to these precious metals. It is noticeable here that in a tale of the 5th dynasty, certainly written as early as the 12th dynasty, we find professional dancers, commonly recognised, and going on travels through the country with a porter. From this tale we also learn that Egyptian women underwent a purification of 14 days, during which they kept apart and did not attend to any household matters. The mistress of the house here inquires if the preparations are made for the feast on her return to household affairs, and hears how the beer cannot be made, for lack of the barley. The securing of the sack is just in accord with the remains of this early period. The use of boxes, of thongs of leather for tying, and of clay seals for securing property, were all familiar matters in the 12th dynasty, as we learn from Kahun. The present close of the tale is evidently only a stage in it, when the treacherous maid meets with the common doom of the wicked in Egyptian romance. How it was continued is a matter of speculation, but Khufu ought certainly to reappear, and to order great rewards for Dedi, who up to this has only had maintenance on his requisite scale provided for him. Yet it is imperative that the children shall be saved from his wrath, as they are the kings of the 5th dynasty. There may be a long episode lost of their flight and adventures. One reference to a date needs notice. The 25th of the month Tibi is said to be the predicted birthday of the children, and Khufu refers to going to Sakhibu at about that time apparently, when the banks of the canal are cut and the land was drying after the inundation. The 25th of the month Tibi is said to be the predicted birthday of the children, and Khufu refers to going to Sakhibu about that time apparently, when the banks of the canal are cut and the land was drying after the inundation, whereon Dedi threatens that the water shall still be deep there. This points to the 25th Tibi being about the close of the inundation. This would be about the case in the beginning of the 4th dynasty, and also in the 12th dynasty, when the papyrus was perhaps written. Hence there is nothing conclusive to draw from this allusion so far, but when we compare this tale with those following, we see good ground for its belonging to a time before the 12th dynasty. The following tale of the peasant and the workman evidently belongs to the 9th or 10th dynasties, when Heracleopolis was the capital, and Sanehat is certainly of the 12th dynasty. Yet in those we see character and incident made the basis of interest, in the place of the childish profusion of marvels of the tales of the magicians. It seems impossible not to suppose that they belong to very different ages and canons of taste, and hence we cannot refer the crudities of the Khufu tales to the time of the far more elaborate and polished recital of the adventures of Sanehat in the 12th dynasty. Being thus obliged to suppose an earlier date for these tales, the allusion to the month of Tibi throws us back to a very early period, the 4th dynasty, for their original outlines. Doubtless they were modified by reciters, and probably took shape in the 5th or 6th dynasties, but yet we must refer to them as belonging practically to the age to which they refer. End of Chapter 1. Recording by Timothy Ferguson, Gold Coast, Australia. Chapter 2 of Egyptian Papyri, First Series. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Timothy Ferguson. Egyptian Tales, First Series, by Sir W. M. Flinders Petrie. Chapter 2. The Peasant and the Workman. In the Sekhet Hemat, 9th Dynasty, the Peasant and the Workman. There dwelt in the Sekhet Hemat, or Salt Country, a peasant called the Sekti, with his wife and children, his asses and his dogs, and he trafficked in all good things of the Sekhet Hemat to Henenseten. Behold, now he went with rushes, natron, and salt, with wood and pods, with stones and seeds, and all good products of the Sekhet Hemat. And this Sekti journeyed to the south unto Henenseten. And when he came to the lands of the house of Fifa, north of Dinat, he found a man there standing on the bank, a man called Hemti, the workman, son of a man called Azri, who was a serf of the high steward Meruitensa. Now said this Hemti, when he saw the asses of Sekti, that were pleasing in his eyes, "Oh, that some good god would grant me to steal away the goods of Sekti from him." Now Hemti's house was by the dyke of the towpath, which was straitened and not wide, as much as the width of a waistcloth. On the one side of it was the water, and on the other side of it grew his corn. Hemti said then to his servant, "Hasten, bring me a shawl from the house." And it was brought instantly. Then he spread out this shawl on the face of the dyke, and it lay with its fastening on the water, and its fringe on the corn. Now Sekti approached along the path used by all men. Said Hemti, "Have a care, Sekti. You are not going to trample my clothes." Said Sekti, "I will do as you like. I will pass carefully." Then he went up on the higher side, but Hemti said, "Go you over my corn instead of the path?" Said Sekti, "I am going carefully. This high field of corn is not my choice, but you have stopped your path with your clothes, and will you then not let us pass by the side of the path?" And one of the asses filled its mouth with a cluster of corn. Said Hemti, "Look you, I will take away your ass, Sekti, for eating my corn. Behold, it will have to pay accordingly to the amount of the injury." Said Sekti, "I am going carefully. The one way is stopped, therefore I took my ass by the enclosed ground, and do you seize it for filling its mouth with a cluster of corn? Moreover, I know unto whom this domain belongs, even unto the Lord Steward Meruitensa. He it is who smites every robber in this whole land, and shall I then be robbed in his domain?" Said Hemti, "This is the proverb which men speak, a poor man's name is only his own matter. I am he of whom ye spake, even the Lord Steward of whom you think." Thereupon he took to him branches of green tamarisk, and scourged all his limbs, took his asses, and drave them into the pasture, and Sekti wept very greatly by reason of the pain of what he had suffered. Said Hemti, "Lift up not your voice, Sekti, or you shall go to the demon of silence." Sekti answered, "You beat me, you steal my goods, and now you would take away even my voice, O demon of silence? If you will restore my goods, then I will cease to cry out at your violence. Secti stayed the whole day petitioning Hemti, but he would not give ear unto him, and Secti went his way to Kenansutan to complain to Lord Steward Meruitensa. He found him coming out of the door of his house to embark on his boat, that he might go to the judgment hall. Secti said, Ho, turn that I may please thy heart with this discourse. Now at this time let one of thy followers, whom thou wilt, come to me, that I may send him to thee concerning it. The Lord Steward Meruitensa made his follower, whom he chose, go straight unto him, and Secti sent him back with an account of all these matters. Then the Lord Steward Meruitensa accused Hemti unto the nobles who sat with him, and they said unto him, By your leave, as to this Secti of yours, let him bring a witness. Behold thou, it is our custom with our Sectis, witnesses come with them. Behold, that is our custom. Then it will be fitting to beat this Hemti for a trifle of natron and a trifle of salt. If he is commanded to pay for it, he will pay for it. But the High Steward Meruitensa held his peace, for he would not reply unto these nobles, but would reply unto the Secti. Now Secti came to appeal to the Lord Steward Meruitensa, and said, O my Lord Steward, greatest of the great, guide of the needy, when thou embarkest on the lake of truth, mayest thou sail upon it with a fair wind. May thy mainsail not fly loose. May there not be lamentation in thy cabin. May not misfortune come after thee. May not thy mainstays be snapped. Mayest thou not run aground. May not the wave seize thee. Mayest thou not taste the impurities of the river. Mayest thou not see the face of fear. May the fish come to thee without escape. Mayest thou reach unto plump waterfowl. For thou art the orphan's father, the widow's husband, the desolate woman's brother, the garment of the motherless. Let me celebrate thy name in this land for every virtue, a guide without greediness of heart, a great one without any meanness, destroying deceit, encouraging justice, coming to the cry and allowing utterance. Let me speak, do thou hear and do justice, O praised whom the praised ones praise. Abolish oppression, behold me, I am overladen, reckon with me, behold me defrauded. Now the Secti made this speech in the time of the majesty of the king Nebka-Enra, blessed. The Lord Steward Meruitensa went straightway to the king and said, My lord, I have found one of these Secti excellent of speech in very truth. Stolen are his goods, and he has come to complain to me of the matter. His majesty said, As thou wishest that I may see his health, lengthen out his complaint, without replying to any of his speeches. He who desireth him to continue speaking should be silent. Behold, bring us his words in writing, that we may listen to them. But provide for his wife and children, and let the Secti himself also have a living. Thou must cause one to give him his portion, without letting him know that thou art he who is giving it to him. There were given to him 4 loaves and 2 draughts of beer each day, which the Lord Steward Meruitensa provided for him, giving it to a friend of his, who furnished it unto him. Then the Lord Steward Meruitensa sent the governor of Sekhet Hemat to make provision for the wife of the Secti, 3 rations of corn each day. Then came the Secti a second time, and even a third time, unto the Lord Steward Meruitensa. But he told 2 of his followers to go unto the Secti, and seize him, and beat him with staves. But he came again unto him, even unto 6 times, and said, My Lord Steward, destroying deceit and encouraging justice, raising up every good thing and crushing every evil, as plenty comes removing famine, as clothing covers nakedness, as clear sky after storm warms the shivering, as fire cooks that which is raw, as water quenches the thirst, look with thy face upon my lot. Do not covet, but content me without fail. Do the right, and do not evil. But yet Meruitensa would not hearken unto his complaint, and the Secti came yet and yet again, even unto the 9th time. Then the Lord Steward told 2 of his followers to go unto the Secti, and the Secti feared that he should be beaten, as at the 3rd request. But the Lord Steward Meruitensa said unto him, Fear not, Secti, for what thou hast done. The Sekhti has made many speeches delightful to the heart of his majesty, and I take an oath, as I eat bread and as I drink water, that thou shalt be remembered to eternity. Said the Lord Steward, moreover, thou shalt be satisfied when thou shalt hear of thy complaints. He caused to be written on a clean roll of papyrus each petition to the end, and the Lord Steward Meruitensa sent it to the majesty of the king Nebka-Enra, blessed, and it was good to him more than anything that is in the whole land. But his majesty said to Meruitensa, Judge it thyself, I do not desire it. The Lord Steward Meruitensa made 2 of his followers go to the Sekhet Hemat, and bring a list of the household of the Sekhti, and its amount was 6 persons, beside his oxen and his goats, his wheat and his barley, his asses and his dogs, and moreover he gave all that which belonged unto the Hemti to the Sekhti, even all his property and his officers. And the Sekhti was beloved of the king more than all his overseers, and ate of all the good things of the king, with all his household. Remarks. Of the tale of the peasant and the workman, 3 copies, more or less imperfect, remain to us. At Berlin are 2 papyri, numbers 2 and 4, containing parts of the tale, published in facsimile in the Denkmaler of Lepsius, volume 6, pages 108 to 110 and 113, while portions of another copy exist in the Butler Papyrus, and lately fragments of the same have been collated in the collection of Lord Amherst of Hackney. These last have been published in the Proceedings of the Society of Biblical Archaeology, volume 14, page 558. The number of copies seem to show that this was a popular tale in early times. It is certainly of a more advanced type than the earlier tales of magic, though it belongs to a simpler style than the tales which follow. It has been translated partially by Chabas and Goodwin, and also by Maspero, but most completely by Griffin in the Proceedings of the Society of Biblical Archaeology, referred to above. The beginning of the tale is lost in all the copies, and an introductory sentence is here added in brackets to explain the position of affairs at the opening of the fragment. The essence of the tale is the difference in social position between the Sekhti, or peasant, and the Hemti, or workman, the fellah and the client of the noble, and the impossibility of getting justice against a client unless by some extraordinary means of attracting his patron's attention is the basis of the action. There is not a single point of incident here which might not be true in modern times. Every turn of it seems to live as one reads it in view of country life in Egypt. The region of the tale is Henenseten, or Heracleopolis, now Arnas, a little south of the Fayum. This was the seat of the 9th and 10th dynasties, apparently ejected from Memphis by a foreign invasion of the Delta, and here it is that the High Steward lives and goes to speak to the king. The district of the Sekhti is indicated by his travelling south to the Henenseten, and going with asses and not by boat. Hence we are led to look for the Sekhet Hemat, or salt country, in the borders of the Fayum Lake, whence the journey would be southward, and across the desert. This lake was not regulated artificially until the 12th dynasty, and hence at the period of this tale it was a large sheet of water, fluctuating with each rise and fall of the Nile, and bordered by lagoons where rushes would flourish, and where salt and natron would accumulate during the dry season of each year. At the present time the lake of Fayum is brackish, and the cliffs which border it contain so much salt that rain pools which collect on them are not drinkable. The paths and roads of Egypt are not protected by law as in western countries. Each person encroaches on a path, or diverts it as may suit his purpose, only checked by the liberties taken by passers-by in trespassing if a path be insufficient. Hence it is very usual to see a house built over half a path, and driving the traffic into the field, or almost over the river bank. In this case the Hemti had taken in as much of the path as he could, and left but a narrow strip along the top of the canal bank. The frequent use of the public way for drying clothes, or spreading out property, gave the idea of choking the way altogether, and leaving no choice but trespassing on the crops. No sooner does a donkey pause, or even pass, by a field of corn than he snatches a mouthful, and in a delay or altercation such as this, the beast is sure to take the advantage. Donkeys carrying loads by cornfields are usually muzzled with rope nets to prevent their feeding, and even sheep and goats are also fended in the same way. The proverb, "A poor man's name is only his own matter," refers to the independent fellah having no patron or protector who will take up and defend his name from accusations, as the interests of clients and serfs would be protected. This being the case, Hemti therefore seizes on the property and drives the asses into his own pasture field. The scene of Marui Tenza laying the case before the nobles who sat with him is interesting, as showing that even simple cases were not decided by one judge, but referred to a council. Similarly, Una lays stress on the private trial of the queen being confided to him and only one other judge. Apparently referring cases to a bench of judges was the means of preventing corruption. The speeches of the secti were given at full length in the papyrus, but owing to injuries we cannot now entirely recover them. They are all in much the same strain, only the first and last are translated here, and the others are passed over. The style of these speeches was evidently looked on as eloquent in those days, and this papyrus really seems to show the time when long-drawn comparisons and flowery wishes were in fashion. It is far different from later compositions, as it is also from the earlier simple narration of crude marvels in the tales of the magicians. The close of the tale is defective, but from the remains it appears to have ended by the gift of the Hemti's property to the oppressed secti, and the triumph of the injured peasant. End of Chapter 2. Recording by Timothy Ferguson, Gold Coast, Australia. Chapter 3 of Egyptian Papyri, First Series. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Timothy Ferguson. Egyptian Tales, First Series, by Sir W. M. Flinders Petrie. Chapter 3. Going to Wawat, 12th Dynasty, the Shipwrecked Sailor. The wise servant said, "Let thy heart be satisfied, O Lord, for that we have come back to the country. After we have long been on board and rowed much, the prow has at last touched land. All the people rejoice and embrace us, one after another. Moreover, we have come back in good health, and not a man is lacking. Although we have been to the ends of Wawat, and gone through the land of Senmut, we have returned in peace, and our land, behold, we have come back to it. Hear me, my lord, I have no other refuge. Wash thee, and turn the water over thy ringers, then go and tell the tale to the majesty." His lord replied, "Thy heart continues still its wandering words, but although the mouth of a man may save him, his words may also cover his face with confusion. Wilt thou do as thy heart moves thee? This thou wilt say, tell quietly." The sailor then answered, "Now I shall tell that which has happened to me, to my very self. I was going to the mines of Pharaoh, and I went down on the sea on a ship of 150 cubits long and 40 cubits wide, with 150 sailors of the best of Egypt, who had seen heaven and earth, and whose hearts were stronger than lions. They had said the wind would not be contrary, or that there would be none, but as we approached the land, the wind arose and threw up waves 8 cubits high. As for me, I seized a piece of wood, but those who were in the vessel perished without one remaining. A wave threw me on an island. After that I had been 3 days alone, without a companion beside my own heart, I laid me in a thicket, and the shadow covered me. Then I stretched my limbs to try and find something for my mouth. I found there figs and grapes, all manner of good herbs, berries and grain, melons of all kinds, fishes and birds. Nothing was lacking, and I satisfied myself, and left on the ground that which was over, of what my arms had been filled wherewithal. I dug a pit, I lighted a fire, and I made a burnt offering unto the gods. Suddenly I heard a noise as of thunder, which I thought to be that of a wave of the sea. The tree shook, and the earth was moved. I uncovered my face, and I saw that a serpent drew near. He was 30 cubits long, and his beard greater than 2 cubits. His body was overlaid with gold, and his colour was that of the true lazuli. He coiled himself before me. Then the serpent opened his mouth, while I lay on my face before him, and he said to me, "What has brought thee? What has brought thee, little one? What has brought thee? If thou sayest not speedily what has brought thee to this isle, I will make thee know thyself. As a flame thou shalt vanish. if thou tellest me not something I have not heard, or which I knew not before thee. Then he took me in his mouth, and carried me to his resting place, and he laid me down without any hurt. I was whole and sound, and nothing was gone from me. Then he opened his mouth against me, while I lay on my face before him, and he said, What has brought thee? What has brought thee, little one? What has brought thee to this isle which is in the sea, and of which the shores are in the midst of the waves? Then I replied to him, and holding my arms low before him, I said to him, I was embarked for the mines by the order of the Majesty, in a ship. 150 cubits was its length, and the width of it 40 cubits. It had 150 sailors of the best of Egypt, who had seen heaven and earth, and the hearts of whom were stronger than lions. They said that the wind would not be contrary, or that there would be none. Each of them exceeded his companion in the prudence of his heart and the strength of his arm, and I was not beneath any of them. A storm came upon us while we were on the sea. Hardly could we reach the shore, when the wind waxed yet greater, and the waves rose even 8 cubits. As for me, I seized a piece of wood, while those who were in the boat perished without one being left with me for 3 days. Behold me now before thee, for I was brought to this isle by a wave of the sea. Then he said to me, fear not, little one, and make not thy face sad. If thou hast come to me, it is God who has let thee live. For it is he who has brought thee to this isle of the blessed, where nothing is lacking, and which is filled with all good after another, until thou shalt be 4 months in this isle. Then a ship shall come from thy land with sailors, and thou shalt live with them, and go to thy country, and thou shalt die in thy town. Converse is pleasing, and he who tastes of it passes over his misery. I will therefore tell thee of that which is in this isle. I am here with my brethren and my children around me. We are 75 serpents, children and kindred, without naming a young girl who was brought unto me by chance, and on whom the fires of heaven fell, and burnt her to ashes. As for thee, if thou art strong, and if thy heart waits patiently, thou shalt press thy infants to thy bosom, and embrace thy wife. Thou shalt return to thy house, which is full of all good things. Thou shalt see thy land, where thou shalt dwell in the midst of thy kindred. Then I bowed in my obeisance, and I touched the ground before him. Behold, that which I have told thee before, I shall tell of thy presence unto Pharaoh. I shall make him to know of thy greatness, and I will bring to thee of the sacred oils and perfumes, and of incense of the temples, with which all gods are honoured. I shall tell moreover of that which I do now see, thanks to him. And there shall be rendered to thee praises before the fullness of all the land. I shall slay asses for thee in sacrifice. I shall pluck for thee the birds, and I shall bring for thee ships full of all kinds of the treasures of Egypt, as is comely to do unto a god, a friend of men in a far country, of which men know not. Then he smiled at my speech, because of that which was in his heart, for he said to me, Thou art not rich in perfumes, for all that thou hast is but common incense. As for me, I am prince of the land of Punt, and I have perfumes. Only the oil which thou sayest thou wouldest bring is not common in this isle. But when thou shalt depart from this place, thou shalt never more see this isle. It shall be changed into waves. And behold, when the ship drew near, according to all that he had told me before, I got me up into an high tree, to strive to see those who were within it. Then I came and told him this matter, but it was already known unto him before. And he said to me, Farewell, farewell, go to thy house, little one, see again thy children, and let thy name be good in thy town. These are my wishes for thee. The farewell. Then I bowed myself before him, and held my arms low before him, and he gave me gifts of precious perfumes, of cassia, of sweet woods, of col, of cypress, an abundance of incense, of ivory tusks, of baboons, of apes, and all kind of precious things. I embarked all in the ship which was come, and, bowing myself, I prayed God for him. Then he said to me, Behold, thou shalt come to thy country in 2 months. Thou shalt press to thy bosom thy children, and thou shalt rest in thy tomb. After this I went down to the shore unto the ship, and I called to the sailors who were there. Then on the shore I rendered adoration to the master of this isle, and to those who dwelt therein. When we shall come in our return to the house of the Pharaoh in the 2nd month, according to all the serpent has said, we shall approach unto the palace, and I shall go in before the Pharaoh. I shall bring the gifts which I have brought from this isle into the country. Then he shall thank me before the fullness of all the land. Grant then unto me a follower, and lead me to the courtiers of the king. Cast thy eye upon me, after that I am come to the land again. After that I have both seen and proved this. Hear my prayer, for it is good to listen to the people. It was said unto me, Become a wise man, and thou shalt come to honour. And behold, I have become such. This is finished, from its beginning unto its end, even as it was found in a writing. It is written by the scribe of cunning fingers, Ameni Amen Ah. May he live in life, wealth, and health. Remarks. This tale is known only in one copy, preserved in the Hermitage collection in St. Petersburg. The papyrus has not been published either in facsimile or transcription, but 2 translations of it have appeared by M. Golenschiff. From the earlier a modified translation is given by Maspero in the Contes Populares 2nd edition, pages 133 to 146, and the later translation is in M. Golenschiff's excellent Inventaire de la collection égyptienne, Hermitage Imperial, pages 177 to 182. The tale is that of a returned sailor, speaking to his superior, and telling his adventures, to induce him to send him on an introduction to the king. At first his master professes to disbelieve him, and then the sailor protests that this happened to himself, and gives his narrative. The idea of an enchanted island which has risen from the waves and will sink again is here found to be one of the oldest plots for a tale of marvels. But the construction is far more advanced than that of the tales of the magicians. The family of serpents and the manner of the great serpent is well conceived, and there are many fine touches of literary quality, such as the noise of thunder, the trees shaking, and the earth being moved at the appearance of the great serpent. The speeches of the serpent and his threat, the sailors who had seen heaven and earth, the contempt of the serpent for his offerings. As to me, I am prince of the land of Punt, and I have perfumes, and the scene of departure. All of these points show a firm hand and practised taste, although there is still a style of simplicity clinging to it, which agrees well with its date in the 12th dynasty. The great serpent is not of a type usual in Egyptian designs. The human-headed uraeus is seldom bearded, and the best example of such a monster is on an Ethiopian temple, where a great uraeus has human arms and a lion's head. The colours again repeat that favourite combination expressive of splendour, gold and lazuli. Though lazuli is very rare in early times, yet it certainly was known in the 12th dynasty, as shown by the forms of some beads of lazuli. The slaughter of asses in sacrifice is a very peculiar offering, and no sign of this is found in any representations or groups of offerings. The colophon of the copyist at the end shows by the style of the name that it belongs to the earlier part of the 12th dynasty, and if so, the composition might be referred to the opening of foreign trade under Sankara or Amenemhat I. End of chapter 3. Recording by Timothy Ferguson, Gold Coast, Australia.